Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. I am Ryan Irvin with Unanet's Customer Success Team. Today, we are going to cover the topic of subcontractor budget and labor management. If you have questions, please type them into the questions box on your webinar dashboard, and we will review them all at the end. This webinar will be recorded and will be available online within a week in case you want to review it again or share with someone else on your team. All of our webinars are located on our Knowledge Center. You can find them by typing the title of the webinar in the search box. If you experience audio or visual issues, please try leaving and rejoining the webinar or try using a different audio option. I'd like to give a quick recap of the customer success role. Your customer success manager is your main point of contact within Unanet. Our role is to help our customers optimize their use of Unanet as well as provide general account support. That includes communication on renewals, new products, events, etc. Please feel free to reach out to your customer success manager for any Unanet questions. If you don't know your customer success manager, please contact us at our general email, csm@unanet.com. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter for today. We are happy to have Christiane Smith from Unanet University to present. Christiane, are you ready?
I am. Thanks, Ryan. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all today about subcontractor management in Unanet. I'd like to talk about some of the benefits of managing your subcontractors in Unanet for you, the benefits for the subcontractors themselves, and then also for your customers. I'm going to spend some time talking about reporting on subcontractor costs, the setup of a subcontractor user in the system, what are some things to consider or look out for as you're entering subs into your Unanet system. I'd also like to walk through and talk through the process of building a proposal with a subcontractor and talk about some project management items to keep in mind, really overall for your projects, whether you're using subs or not, but with the idea in mind of managing your subcontractors. So we'll talk about that during the discussion of the project lifecycle. And then lastly, as Ryan mentioned, we will have some time for questions and answers. So if you could please write your questions in the questions box as we go. When we get to the end of the presentation, Ryan and I will facilitate some time to talk through questions and answers. And if we don't have an opportunity to answer all of those questions today, then we'll certainly follow up after the webinar. So let me go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to go through a scenario today where we have a new RFP for a cybersecurity project for our little sample company. And I'd like to talk about, what this looks like if I have this new RFP. I have existing employees, but I also have some subcontractors that I'd like to include in the RFP process. So I want to show you the options to consider when setting this up in Unanet, reviewing all those benefits as I mentioned, talking about how the subcontractors may or may not be using the system to enter in their labor timesheets and other project costs, but how you can use Unanet as a single source for managing your project, including all of your subcontractors. So this new RFP that I'm going to use as my sample is a really exciting opportunity for us, but we know here that we can't do it alone and we're going to need some help. So I'd like to be able to understand about my subcontractors, who I might be able to pull into a project based on some kind of skills or requirements that I have for the people that are going to fulfill different roles on the project. I would like to be able to know if that subcontractor is someone that I've used before and whether or not I would want to use them again based on past performance. I'd like to understand if I am using those subcontractors, what those costs will look like, and see what would happen if I were to change that subcontractor to an employee, and see how that would change the cost. Is it more cost effective to keep a sub or to bring in some direct employee users? So I'm going to take a look at all of those kinds of things as I go through this scenario with you today and talk about this particular project. So we do have a number of customers that are using Unanet to manage their subcontractors in a couple of different ways. So I'm planning to introduce those different methodologies with you as we talk through our scenario today. So with Unanet, you can have an integrated approach to managing your direct employees and the subcontractors. One of the things that you may want to do is eliminate the paper timesheets that your subs are currently filling out and submitting. Generally, it's hard to keep track of their time. Sometimes they're not timely in giving you that information. Sometimes it's in a different format than what you need. And so eliminating that would be great. Often, our clients also want to be able to eliminate the paper invoices that are being sent over from the clients and all the backup data, I should say, all the backup reports to support those invoices. So having all of the data in one place about what the subcontractors are doing, what time they're charging, and all of that information would be ideal. Now, of course, your subcontractor organizations are likely still going to give you an invoice, right, for the work that they've performed and how much you owe them, which makes sense. But if we could have all this data already in Unanet, we could theoretically be paying those invoices much faster. We would be able to validate the data from the Unanet reporting to be able to pay those invoices to those subcontractors much, much faster. Plus, if our subcontractors are using Unanet to record their time, to enter in other project information, if they have other expenses or travel costs, and they entered that in Unanet, we would be able to pull all of that together into a single invoice with the data from our direct labor, other subcontracting organizations, like independent contractors as well, to come up with a single invoice to be able to send to our customer. There's a lot of great benefit of having the subcontractors using Unanet to enter their information so that we can avoid some of the issues that come up with managing subcontractors. Now, one of the things that we have to consider if we're going to have subcontractors using the Unanet system is the licensing. So generally speaking, each subcontract user that you have set up in your Unanet system will consume one of your Unanet licenses. If you are planning to have those subcontractors entering the timesheet data or any expense like travel type information, they would need to have a license to be able to accomplish that. If you simply need to manage the budget of subcontractors, be able to forecast and plan their labor and budget your project, then you may be able to use what we call a Unisource only license, which is a license that allows you to have a resource named in the system that you use for planning purposes to go out and plan the work for the project. That user would not be able to create the timesheet, but they would be in your resource plan. And then as you collected the invoice from that subcontracting organization, you'd be able to look at that compared to your plan. Oh, if you are having your Unanet users, subcontractors log into the Unanet system, one of the things that people often ask about or think about is how we're going to show that subcontractor information in the reports and how you're going to see that subcontractor is part of your project cost. So here I have a costing report showing the subcontractor's labor as an expense item. So I have it in my ODC area. Accounting might typically receive an invoice from the subcontractor. And if you're receiving invoices from your subs and you're not using Unanet to manage those subcontractor data entry points, then you've got this delay, right? You've got the invoice coming in. It's going to take a couple weeks to get that turned around from the subcontractor organization to get it to you. You're going to have to turn it around and be able to add that information into Unanet either through an expense report line item or as an AP transaction if you're using the financials license. The challenge here is that the expense item that you're entering or that AP transaction is going to be billed and put into the system in a different period than your other direct labor. Because assuming at the end of the month you're going to be able to charge your direct labor, but these subcontractor costs are going to come in with some kind of delay. It's just kind of inevitable if that's the processing method that you're using. So you might be mixing those apples and oranges on the bill for the employee work that incurred during the period and the subcontractor work. And that's important when you're running any of the periodic reports, or if you're running and including this data as part of your invoice. If you're using Unanet to manage your subcontractors, then we are able to put the subcontractor labor in and have that labor showing right in the same period with your other direct labor. Now, this report is breaking out the subcontractor labor into a separate line item. It doesn't have to be visually set up to be a separated line item, but what I can differentiate now are the subcontractors that are using Unanet to enter their labor directly through the timesheets versus those that I'm entering in through an AP voucher or through an expense report. You know, behind the scenes, we have a lot of flexibility in being able to manage how those subcontractor costs are differentiated, and also what indirect costs are applied to that labor. So I will show you as we get into the demonstration of Unanet how I'm setting up a user to be a subcontractor and have, you know, any kind of indirect rate that's special, like the material and handling, applied to their labor and also making sure that we're not applying those unallowable things like fringe or overhead onto a subcontractor. We have a lot of flexibility in the reporting on how we can see the subcontractor labor costs. We have a lot of flexibility in how we can see the subcontractor data to be able to include that in the bills to our clients as well. So I'd like to ask a question before I move into our scenario here. I'd like to understand a little bit about how you're currently having your subcontractors provide you with data, and if you have any of that data in Unanet. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll question. So you should see on your screen a question asking, how do you currently enter subcontractor data into Unanet? So if you can just take a quick minute here, quick second or two to go in ahead and put in your answer, that would be great. Okay, so I see lots of answers coming in, so let's go ahead and keep the votes going. Thank you, everybody, so far for participating. If you could please answer our question about how you currently enter subcontractor labor in Unanet, I'd really appreciate it. Okay, so it looks like we have just about everybody. I'm going to go ahead and close this and share our results. So as you can see here, there are a number of the participants on the line today that are entering the subcontractor labor costs in the timesheets of Unanet, and that is one of the options that I'm going to be showing you today. We also have some clients that are entering the subcontract labor costs into the expense reports, and traditionally that is done by creating an expense report in Unanet and documenting or entering the dollar amount for the subcontract invoice so that you can see it in these types of reports that I have up on the screen here. We also have a number of clients that are on the call today that are entering the information through your vendor invoices, and you know, hopefully they're then also associating that line item with an expense type so that you can see those costs as part of the report. And then finally, there's some of you that are still just learning about subcontractor management in Unanet, and so I'm glad to see that you're just learning about it, thinking about it, and we'll be happy to answer any further questions that you have about it. So it's a good mix of folks that are on the line here, so thank you for participating. Okay, so let's talk about some of the setup pieces for creating a subcontractor in Unanet. What are some of the things that you should consider or think about if you are going to have users in Unanet that are using the timesheets to be able to be set up? So I'm going to start with that. And you can always have a blend. You know, I made this a multi-select answer because you might have a blend of different types of subcontractors that are using the system in different ways. You might have some that you have using the timesheets and others that you do not, and that's okay. For those subcontractors that are going to use a timesheet, the first thing you're going to want to do, most likely, is have an organization established for those subcontractors. Some of our clients will simply create one organization, you know, that called a subcontractor org or something like that, and they'll associate it with their company and put it out as a financial organization, and then they will go out and associate all of their subcontractors into that one single organization. We also have customers that, particularly if you're using the vendor invoice option, will instead create a different organization for the different companies that they're subbing to, and then set those organizations up with a vendor profile that provides information about the vendor, what legal entities it's associated with, and the default payment terms for their invoices and things like that. One of the things I wanted to point out while we were here is that in your vendor profile, we have some standard data fields, but don't forget that as an administrator to Unanet, you have the option to create user-defined fields that are specific to a vendor profile. And so this might be an awesome way for you to start tracking information about the vendors and subcontract organizations that you have. Remember that you can create free-form text fields or drop-down menu items, numeric fields, date fields. There's all kinds of information that you can create into your vendor profile. And then when you're looking for information for the vendors that you would like to see, you're able to go out and look at that information and see if that vendor organization or subcontracting organization may be somebody that could come in and do some of the work for you if you have any special requirements. So do keep in mind those vendor user-defined fields. Okay. Once you have that organization set up, you'll need to set up the subcontractor user. So I'm going to go out to my people dashboard here. And on my people dashboard, what I've done is I've created a number of users that are set up as subcontractors using my subcontracting organization. So I'm going to search by that real quickly. And I can see that I have one subcontract user that's out in the system right now that's currently active, Sam, the subcontractor. I'm assuming that in real life, none of your subcontractors actually have that as their last name, but it works pretty well in the training world, so I'll keep it. Now, you might have some subcontractors that are active users in the system because they're working on projects for you, but maybe there are some subcontractors that you've used in the past that you'd like to keep in Unanet as a reference or a tool. So back on the search tab of your person profile, don't forget that you can always include inactive people in your search results. And what that will allow you to do is go out and see any other users that are out there, your subcontractors, maybe your past employees that you had a good relationship with that might be able to sub to you. So do include your active people in your filters. You also can use the search tab on the people profile to search for all kinds of other information, including labor categories or locations, if that's something that's helpful to you. There's a couple of other things here to take a look at, so just keep that in mind when you're looking for people in general. Once you come back to the list, then now I can see, well, what happened? Well, I don't know where Sally is. I'll have to go find her. But anyway, I have two people out there, and so I can go out and take a look at those users and see them. Now, part of the buildup of the subcontractor profile that you might want to keep in mind a couple of things. Not only do you want to associate the person with the correct subcontractor organization here, and fill out the other information, as you typically would as you set up any new user. There's a couple of other things to point out for the user setup. First is on the Roles tab. You will want to think about the different roles that this subcontractor user will need to have. Traditionally, we'll see the subcontractor user having things like a timesheet user role so that they can create a timesheet. I would like to point out that if you have our portfolio license, you also want to give that user the Unisource user role, and that's what allows that user to be included in your resource planning, particularly for future proposals or any project work that you're going to have them working on. So I would recommend that Unisource user role for them as well. And then you have to think about other things like whether or not they're going to create expense reports, whether or not they'd have to go out and take a look at any data and run any reports as a viewer or a project viewer, those kinds of things. As you're setting up your subcontract user, you'll also want to make sure on the Rates tab that you have a couple of key pieces of information identified here on the Rates tab. First of all, you'll want to look at the classification of the user to confirm that they're set up as a non-employee. If you're using Unanet to calculate your labor costs and you're using the feature that we call dilution, your exempt employees are always going to be set up to have a diluted cost. And so in order to ensure that the costs are going to be accurate for a subcontractor, you'll want to set them up as non-employees. And of course, that also helps in your other reporting. We have a number of standard person reports that allow you to filter on classification to separate your direct employees from other subcontractors or hourly paid folks if you need to separate your salaried from your hourly paid workers. The other piece of information that's critical here on the Rates tab is the labor cost element. So this labor cost element is what's identifying really this user as a subcontractor. You can call them whatever you want as their name. You can put them in whatever organization you want, but unless you tell us that that user is a subcontractor as part of their labor cost element, we're not going to recognize the cost for them as part of your subcontract reporting. In the report that I showed in the slides a few minutes ago, the reason that I showed that subcontractor labor line was because I had users associated with this subcontract labor cost element. So if you aren't currently using any subcontractors in Unanet today and you plan to in the future, you'll need to make sure you set up a cost element for those subcontractors. And then within your cost structure, you'll need to set up the addition of the subcontract labor cost element to be able to add that to the cost structure and then modify your cost report from there. We do have user-defined fields on the person profile as well, so here's some information that you might want to provide or fill out for the user. So do think about with your person user-defined fields if there's anything special you'd track for your subcontractor. The last thing that I'd like to show you here while we're in the person profile is the skills area. So if you have our portfolio license, you do have the opportunity to add skills to any user in the system, including your subcontractors. And what this will do is it'll allow you to identify those things from a skill perspective that these subcontractors have that you may need to pull in when you're working on a new RFP or proposal, or when you're trying to identify which subcontractors should help you on future work. So I've used the skills to not only track your traditional skills like languages, programming languages, certifications. I've also used this skill area to identify different clearance types, to identify some preferences and experience of things like working in the federal government space, working in the retail space, et cetera, whatever that happens to be for your organization. So think outside the box a bit with skills and don't think of them as specific, job skill functions that those users have, but maybe other qualities that they possess as well that you're going to want to track. The skills give you a lot of opportunity to go out and run reports and find people to look at their utilization, both projected and in the past. And so it gives you an opportunity to see who's coming available. Now, one thing that you may be considering if you have subcontractors that you've used in Unanet in the past, and you have been able to track, their performance on projects before. So the long-term look, if you're having those users fill out your timesheets, is that you are able to go out then and look at that data for things that they've worked on. So for example, I've created a actual summary report out from the reports dashboard that shows me all of the projects that Sam has worked on in the past. And I set this up to, if I look back on the criteria, to look specifically for Sam here. I set up my date range to look at the beginning of time through today. So any projects he's worked on at any point in time, and showing those project, information here. I could show tasks. I could dig into labor categories. I could show his rates if I wanted to see what I used to pay him, for example. But the general idea here is that I can see what work he's done on what projects. And then knowing the projects that this user has worked on previously, I could go out and run my organization activity report, which I'll actually talk to you again in a little bit. That could show me the success of that project. If I'm using project notes, I could see any risks or issues that may have come about, whether they were related to the subcontractor or not. But it's a really great way to be able to, track for a future reference what work these subs have done for you. And then using some of the other tools with the Unanet, being able to really document that work experience to see if you would want to bring them into other projects. So just based on the fact here that I've brought Sam in on 5 different projects, probably assumes to me that he's fairly good. And I could always modify this criteria to do things like changing this over to look at the previous and current quarter or previous and current month to just see what is he doing most recently kind of idea versus what he's been doing long ago. So there's some ways to capture this data down, I think, into smaller bits as well to see what's kind of new and what's older. Okay, so those are some things about managing the people themselves that I think is important to note in here, and getting them set up so that you can start to use them in the system. One other quick note that I'll make that I forgot to mention, a couple of them. First of all, any users that you have that you're not planning to have them use the time and expenses, but you would like that subcontractor to be part of your RFP, so you're going to plan them out, you're going to plan them on your project, you can set up as a Unisource user, which means that they can be used in just that planning function. You can also designate the user as a TBD resource, meaning that they're not identified as a single person. So instead of this person representing Sam, a specific individual human being, I could set up a subcontractor, generic subcontractor person profile that just has that planning role and is set as a TBD user. And what that does is it allows that user to be identified in your plans for your projects, to be thought about as someone that will be part of the staff eventually on the project, and that you would replace with a real person at some point in time. And these Unisource only users that are available in the system are available with the Portfolio Plus user licenses, which are a different bucket of users, if you will, that are available to our portfolio customers. So if you have any questions about that, if you're interested in having some unnamed users that you could use for planning that won't necessarily be direct employees but might be subcontract organizations, it's another thing to think about. All right, so let's talk about the project lifecycle a bit. So of any of you that have been working on project management for any period of time or familiar with this project lifecycle, there's nothing Unanet specific really here, although these aren't necessarily your terms coming out of the Project Management Institute, but it's close enough. So we're going to have some kind of proposal that is going to be awarded, and then we're going to start working on the project. So I would like to talk about this process here and how the subs can be a part of that in Unanet to get that proposal work and have that come into an award and start working on the project. As you know from the Project Management Institute, this award process is really sort of your planning phase. You know, you go into the planning of your project and then you start in your execute phase. So that's kind of all a part of this. Then you get into your monitor and control area where you're going to go out and monitor the performance of your entire project, but including the subs as well. Here in Unanet, we're going to also want to talk about the billing process and what that looks like here if we have our subcontractors using Unanet. And finally, we're going to close out the project and move on. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time in the closing and billing phases, as there are other webinars and knowledge center entries discussing those in better detail. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is some of the rate management items. So when you're thinking about your subcontractors and really any other user in the system, we have two different labor rates that we're going to associate with a user. First, we have our cost rate, which is the rate that we're paying that individual. So in your subcontractor world, that cost rate should be the rate that you're paying that subcontractor for their labor. That might already be a built-up rate. If they're working for some kind of subcontractor organization, then that's all great and fine. But for Unanet's purposes, the cost needs to be the cost that you're paying them. If you have time and materials type contracts, then you'll also want a bill rate for your subcontractor. The bill rate can be set both at the person level or at the project level. And really for subcontractors, I should mention that both of these rates can be set at a project level as well. So if you pay your subcontractors at a different rate based on the work that they're performing, you can establish their cost rate at the project level. If you are charging your customer on a time and materials contract at a different rate, you would incorporate that into the bill rate for their labor. And you can do that at the project level or the person level. If you have a cost plus type contract, then we will be using this base cost rate and adding in the indirects that you design as part of your cost structure to the subcontractor. So for example, if you charge a subcontractor rate plus G&A plus subcontract management fee plus something else, you would build that as part of your cost structure. And there you wouldn't need to have a bill rate. You'd have that cost rate representing the base rate and then the indirects in your cost structure adding on top of that for what you're going to charge your customer. And if you have a fixed price subcontract where it's a fixed that you're passing through to your customer or passing through, or if you're charging your customer a fixed rate for the subcontract labor, I would still recommend that you have a cost rate for your subcontractor so that you can look at metrics like profitability. If we don't have any kind of cost for subcontract labor, we really can't give you good information back on profitability. So these are all some things to keep in mind. Now, if you're going to create proposals in Unanet, the way that you do that is you go out and you create your proposal and start to build things up. So typically what we see most of our clients doing here is doing a bottom-up type proposal where they start building based on level of effort and the resources they have, what's it going to take to get this thing done, and start to build that out. And we have a couple of different options for you to create pricing scenarios in the system, both by using what we call plan sets and by creating versions of plan sets. So that's something that's really exciting and I think could be used quite well, and that's available on our portfolio license. You also have the option to go out and create your final budget, including those subcontract costs. So with a tracking license, you would typically be budgeting all of this at your task level and have a task set up for your subcontract budget. With our portfolio license, you can do that, same thing, or you can build that out in our resource plans and actually create a formal baseline based on your plan set. So that's the very, again, another exciting opportunity that you have if you have the portfolio license. And your proposal really could include then your employees, your subcontractors, any teaming partners that you might have, any other pieces that you have in there. If you have these things identified in Unanet, then you can include them all in your proposal and generate your proposal straight out of the system. Okay, and then lastly, I'm going to talk about for right now is just this idea of the award. You know, being able to go out and get the award back from your customer and modify that proposed data in Unanet to change it straight to an award is really very powerful. It saves a lot of time. It gives you a great way to go back and look at what was originally proposed to compare to what you're actually going to do. And if you're yet using these vendor organizations and your subcontractors, then you can go out and assign your subcontractors to the work so that they can start to charge time to the project. You can, have that be an authorized effort then based on the assignment, and you can control your subcontractors' time charging based on the budgets in the assignments. So that, of course, applies to employees as well. But on the subcontractor perspective, it gives you a lot more power to be able to stop them from overcharging hours or charging hours in a time period that you aren't expecting. So it can help to really control that, if you will. So let's go out and take a look at Unanet at some of these items here. So I'm going to get back into my project list now. And I have a project in my system that's a template project. This is one of these things that we recommend that you set up in the system. If you don't already have a template project, you might want to think about creating one, because what that allows you to do is set in a number of defaults and instructions about how to use the project. For example, some of the defaults on how you want your time managed, maybe how you want your expenses managed, user-defined fields, that kind of thing. So you would set up a template with whatever information you'd want to have when you start, and then when you're ready to go to create a new project, you can take that template and copy it with this copy function. And when you copy the project, it will copy the project profile information by default, but you also then have the opportunity to copy all of these other pieces of information, which can really save you a whole lot of time. If you have a project that's very, very similar to a new effort, being able to go out and copy a lot of this information could save a lot of time. Okay. So you can choose all of that or certain values there, and when you go out to create a new project, the system will generate that new project, and now all we need to do is go in and set up the new project code and modify things that are different, and we'll be ready to go. So I'm going to create my proposal here. I'm going to rename my project code, and I'm just making things up, so you can, of course, want to use probably something much more realistic than I am. But I'm going to identify the status of the project. If it's a pipeline, I'm going to create my project proposal here. I'll go out and fill out any information that I have across the board here of what I want, things to be. I can go ahead and save this and start getting to work on my proposal. When I'm setting up my proposal, particularly if I'm going to be working with subcontractors that I'm going to need to manage at a granular level, I might want to think about building out a task work breakdown structure. Just as a quick reminder, you can also copy your tasks from any project in the system to create a new project list. So for example, if you have a project already in Unanet and the tasks for that project are going to be very similar to the tasks for this new project, you can copy over those tasks. You can choose to include the dates or set those dates to a more generic date range and change them later, which I think is a great way to make sure you're not accidentally setting up tasks for 5 years ago. You can think about the information that you want to include in your tasks that you're copying over, whether the budgets would be the same or not, whether any of the other information about the tasks would be the same, including the user-defined fields, which are listed here in the Other tab. And then when you copy that task list, there you go. This is the task list that I have for this type of work. It's the same, over and over and over again. What's different? Well, the date ranges. And here I have beginning to end of time as my date range. That's probably not all that helpful to me. But if you've ever worked with a task list, here's another little tip that's not related to subcontractors, but it's a good one. When you use this double pencil icon when you're in your task list of a project, you can come out and modify any of the values that are displayed in this list. And back on the search tab, you can add other values to the list as well. So I could come out and add things like the budgets or the durations of those tasks. And when I come back to my list here, I'm going to see those fields available as well. And when I use this double pencil, now I've got this just editable list. So I can go ahead and say, well, I'm going to start this project, today. Here I am on my list. And instead of ending, I don't know how long this is, 200 years, I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm going to have this done in about 6 months, which will automatically change my duration for me, or you can modify that too. And then I could think about, what are my budgets for that? If I have that information already, maybe I don't, because I need to build up the proposal first. So doing this kind of task management can really make things easier for you and will definitely help you as you're building out your proposal. I don't know about you, but if my requirements took 6 months, I might have a hard time with that. I like short-term projects, but hey, that's all right. I'm just making things up as I go here. So again, you just come through here and modify your date, put the information in that you need to have, and then keep going. Okay. And then, of course, save that when you're done, and you'll have your task list ready to go. Now, your plans that you're going to create for your proposal allow you to go in and add your subcontractors. So when you go in to create a plan, I'm going to open up a planning grid here because I like the way that the planning grids allow me to see things like the project and task dates, the budgets, and the subtotals. I can not only pull in my direct employees, but I can also pull in my subcontractors here. So for example, I could find anybody with some kind of clearance type skill. And when I go into my plan, I see Sam, my subcontractor, and if I had any employees with clearances, I'd see them listed here as well. So you can include multiple people as you are including additional information in your plan. Now, Sam is set up as a subcontractor active user, so I can create a plan. He's set up as a Unisource user, so I can go out and start to plan that work. So based on the information that I have, I can come back and I can show my task, which might allow me then to go out and plan, for the next 6 months. Sam should be spending about 40 hours a month working on requirements, and then we expect him to start working heavily on the prototype. He's going to spend much more time working on that. He's going to be working pretty much full time on that prototype for a while. And that's allowing me to start building this out. And you can see the other areas here. I could create this all by task. I don't have to use tasks here, but I think it gives me a lot more information. And then by having this plan up here for Sam, I can see not only the total number of hours that I'd expect him to be working, and down here's my grand total, but I can start to see a whole lot of information about what this is going to cost me and how this is going to look when I go out and take a look at some of my other reports. So I'm going to open up my reporting tab here. I'm going to go out and take a look at my cost summary report, which I love. It's one of my favorite periodic reports, which is available in the portfolio license. If you don't have the portfolio license and the tracking license, you can look at the assignment information or the actual information that's very, very similar to this speed format in the project cost summary and the summary by cost element, which is another really great report. Let's see here. So I'm going to come out and take a look at my list here, and I created my report for customer one. Let me see, I have customer one, and there we go. There it is, my proposal. Excellent. And I can look at this year, month over month, starting from the current month. So starting, today, moving forward, what is this going to look like? I can look at the data from my plans. I can also, as I move forward, look at my budgets and actuals and things like that. And when I go out and run this report, I can see that, I don't have any direct labor planned yet, but I do have my subcontractor labor planned. I have my indirect costs out here of what that should cost me to add G&A onto that plan based on the G&A rate that I have established for this fiscal year where the plans are set. I don't have my revenue set up yet. I haven't done that yet, but here I can see what my expected costs are going to be for my subcontractor And so I can see that. I can see the hours back over in my planning grid of how many hours I had assumed. So if this was it, I can now go out and say, okay, Sam, I need you for 600 hours, and I'm going to pay you, $30,000 and see if you can get them under this number, or whatever it is that you're going to use to look out here. Then as Sam starts to record his actuals and actually work on the project, I'm going to be able to see that work by including the actuals out here, being able to combine them together, looking at the variance between what was included, between those actuals and those plans to see, how much money was, did he actually spend, how much was less, all of those great things that come with the process here of, really going out and doing that execution of the contract. So having your subcontractors come out and do the time input, be a part of the approval process, like any other timesheet user. If they have expense reports, being able to enter those, and really being able to collaborate with all of the subcontractor pieces, like using project notes to track the subcontract agreements, are really going to be a great way for you to have your project managers managing the projects and looking at that data and pretty close to real time. The cost report is the item that I just showed you. And with the cost report, monitoring the cost and profitability, including the burn of being able to compare the actuals to your plans, really gives you a lot of great insight into how your subcontractors are performing, whether they're going to go over or under budget. And we have in our project management courses and some of the knowledge center entries, even information about looking at things like, when are you going to run out of funding? When are you projected to run out of funding and you need to go get more funding for your project? So knowing what your subcontractors are doing in real time, better real time, gives you that better insight into when you're going to need to go ask for your next round of funding. And there's many other metrics that we can provide in the reports that I think you'd be able to find in Unanet. All of that data, of course, is going to come in and be a part of the bill. We can show the subcontractors all together as part of labor, or we can separate them out and show them as separate labor entries, as subcontractor entries specifically. So the invoice format has a lot of flexibility on how you want to show your subcontractors. If you want to show them as part of ODCs, if you want to show them as part of labor, if you want them mixed with your direct employees, or separated out. And so there's a lot of really great flexibility there in what you're going to show in your invoice, which is great. And then lastly, I talked a little bit about updating the sub-history and kind of thinking about how the subcontractor did from a metrics perspective. You'll be able to see that into the future and how they performed on the project. And using the project notes feature would allow you to document some of those more subjective kind of attributes of that subcontractor. And lastly, keeping a list of all your subcontractors by inactivating those that you're not using any longer will really help you to manage those resources and reactivate them when you're able to pull them into a new project. So I've been talking an awful lot, and I just kind of realized that I was running out of time. So I'm sorry if I didn't leave enough time for questions and answers. But Ryan, do we have any questions out there?
Yeah, we do. The first question is for subcontractors being entered through AP. Are there any reports that show billing or revenue numbers for a project which include subcontractors and aren't only reflecting labor and expenses?
Yeah, so if your subcontractor costs are being put in through a vendor invoice, then you can go out and you can associate that invoice with an expense type. It'll mark that as an expense on the project and will come across through the ODCs based on the setup of that expense type in the cost structure. So you would be able to see that, and if you needed to see it at a fairly granular level, you'd want to create a specific expense type, probably, for that granularity that you want, whether it's per subcontractor or whatever it happens to be, so that you can look at that in the cost summary report or in the cost summary reports. It's not going to be available in your project-based reports, though.
All right, the second question was, can you make time card entries against a proposal to track business development cost or the cost it took to get the work?
Yes, Which is such a great question. Thank you for asking that one. Yes, absolutely. So when you create a proposal project in Unanet, you can record time against it. There's nothing that says that a proposal can't be one of your active projects. You'll just want to make sure that your project type is set appropriately, so it's not set likely as billable, which I had for mine. You might not have noticed, but that you set that up as a sales cost, SG&A. And then when you're ready to get the award and start working on that project, what you basically do then is take that proposal and copy the proposal, including the plans and all of the other data attributes that you had, into a new project, close the proposal, which will close out the timekeeping on the business development effort, and then now the timekeeping, because we don't copy any of the actual data, it's only copying those plans, assignments, and the project setup information. So now your new project will be the actual awarded project. You can modify the plans if they change somewhat from what you had originally proposed, and then now use that to record the actuals and still be able to go back and look at then the actual profitability and of that actual project, and then include the costs that you had on your proposal project, because there's two separate projects in Unanet.
The third question was, how do you pay subcontractors in Unanet, or do you link it with ADP?
Yeah, good question. So just depending on how you set things up, you can pay your subcontractors a couple different ways. We do have 1099 processing in Unanet if you have our financials license. So if you have 1099 contractors, you can pay them, and manage the 1099 forms at the end of the year. We don't offer payroll in our financial solution, so traditionally you are going to have to, pay them either through cutting a check to their vendor account, or processing that through whatever other means that you have. But you can have them set up as a vendor to cut a check to them if you are using Unanet Financials. And the other thing I should mention too is I'm sorry, real quick. In the future, we will have the opportunity for you, as you enter a voucher, to include the hours. That's coming with, I believe, with our purchasing release, or in some future release, we've talked about doing that. So it's something to note that you all may be excited about. Sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
Do you need a license for each subcontractor that enters timesheet data?
Yeah, great question. So if you need to be able to see that granular level of timesheet data by person, yes, you would need a license for each person. We do have the opportunity to enter more than 24 hours a day in a timesheet. So, so there are some other options there. Some of our customers will record the time in a timesheet for their subcontractor to have that cost there, by entering the lump sum number of hours or something. But really, for that, the benefit of having the granularity of real-time data entry and things like that, you'd want to have the timesheets up to date and being entered, as quickly as possible. We have had some customers. I worked with a customer a number of years ago that put that into their subcontract agreement, that they would use Unanet for their individuals. And so, yes, they did purchase a license for each one of their subs, but because the cash flow was so much faster, it actually worked out pretty well. And they just initiated that when they renegotiated the subcontract. So they were actually able to go in and basically pass the cost on to the license through the contract. So, if you have a large organization of subcontractors that are working for you, that may be the way to approach that, is to be ready to do that when you're renegotiating the subcontract agreement, and can get them to cover, some of the costs.
Can you enter can you enter the subcontractor hours through AP?
Yeah, so not today. That's a great question. We do not have the option available today to enter the subcontract hours through AP, but my understanding is that that is something that we are looking at in the product roadmap.
And one more question, when the purchasing product is online, will that allow us to automatically create budgets from the PO that are created?
Well, that's a really great question. And to be honest with you, I don't know the answer. So that's something, Ryan, that I'll have to research and get back to you on, who asked that question. But I will go ahead and plug that later on this quarter, I don't believe that this webinar has probably been posted yet for you to go ahead and register, but later this quarter we are going to have a webinar on the purchasing functionality to be able to show you what some of that looks like and have our product management team come on to talk about it. So I will certainly research that and get back to the individual that asked that question, but if you all are interested in that functionality, do be looking for that webinar that's coming soon. And if you're going to join us for the Champions Conference coming up in another couple of weeks, we will also have our product managers there discussing the product roadmap, and so that's a great way to also see what's coming in the product overall and ask those types of questions. So hopefully that's okay for now, but I'll certainly get back to you after I talk with product management.
All right, for any of the outstanding questions, we can have your customer success manager reach out to you after this.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And I appreciate everybody's questions. I'm sorry I didn't leave more time for questions and answers, but yeah, please do reach out. So
thank you, Christiane, for all the great content and Q&A. Once again, the webinar presentation will be available online within a week. And for those of you who have outstanding questions we didn't get to, you should see those responses soon from your CSM. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, everybody, for joining.